Dennis Blair, the new director of national intelligence, delivered a report to Congress today that said, and I'm paraphrasing here, you think Afghanistan's bad? It is. It's really, really bad. But you think that's bad? Consider how scary the global financial meltdown is. The meltdown that is currently destabilizing countries around the world. Ta-da! Just in case you were sleeping too well these days, how many of us have been thinking about the economic meltdown as the potential cause of a global international security meltdown, like countries go away meltdown? Wow. In the meantime, though, we've got our very own security and stability meltdown to contend with in Afghanistan, where tens of thousands of Americans in uniform are awaiting tens of thousands of more Americans in uniform, as well as a new direction, a new set of military goals from the new commander-in-chief and his advisors. The new intelligence director, Admiral Blair, today highlighted Afghanistan's out-of-control drug trade and, in sort of unprecedentedly blunt terms, the corruption and fecklessness of the Karzai government that we're supposedly propping up there. His written testimony included this quote, Kabul's inability to build effective, honest, and loyal provincial and district-level institutions capable of providing basic services and sustainable, licit livelihoods erodes its popular legitimacy and increases the influence of local warlords and the Taliban. The first question you should ask yourself after reading that is, so our military mission isn't propping up that ineffective, dishonest, and disloyal government, is it? Is it? The city of Kabul itself was a giant visual aid for Afghanistan's deteriorating security on Wednesday when the Taliban carried out coordinated attacks against government buildings, attacks that killed 20 people. Richard Holbrooke, the State Department's new envoy to Afghanistan and Pakistan, arrived in Kabul today. We wish you all the best, sir. Really, I mean, we really need you to be a diplomacy superhero, okay? Over in Iraq, which is now swapping places with Afghanistan in Americans' minds as the thing we call the other war. For the second day in a row in Iraq, Shiite pilgrims were attacked, this time in the Shiite holy city of Karbala, with a combined death toll of 20. Meanwhile, on the home front, bombshell reporting about the toll of all of these years of long, repeated deployments for our soldiers and what happens when they get back here. Mark Benjamin and Michael DeUona have a reported series in Salon.com this week about the shocking rise in the Army's suicide rate. It's now at its highest level in 3 decades. The series investigates a number of military deaths, suicides, overdoses, and murders, and it finds, quote, in most cases, the deaths seemed avoidable if the Army had better handled garden-variety combat stress reactions. Avoidable by the Army. It's a problem that Salon describes as the, quote, unaddressed madness and despair coming home with U.S. troops. There is some good news to report, and it comes in the form of Iraq and Afghanistan veterans taking matters into their own hands. Iraq and Afghanistan Veterans of America, in their words, stormed the Hill this week, lobbying Congress on veterans' health care issues and getting results. Joining us now is Paul Rieckhoff, who's founder and executive director of Iraq and Afghanistan Veterans of America. Paul, thanks very much for coming on the show.
My pleasure, Rachel. Great to be with you.
I want to hear about these results from storming the Hill this week. What did you guys accomplish?
Well, we took dozens of veterans from around the country and brought them to Washington for a week of meetings. We went with over 100 lawmakers. We held 2 press events to tell lawmakers what our veterans, troops, and military families need. We highlighted the need for a focus on the new GI Bill's proper implementation, the need for mandatory mental health counseling, and we called for advanced funding of the VA, which is critical. Every year the VA budget is late, and VAs around the country are forced to ration care. So we're happy to see that Congressman Filner and Senator Akaka stepped up today and introduced a new piece of legislation that has bipartisan support that will provide advanced funding for the VA and get veterans hospitals, hundreds of them around the country, the support that they badly need.
So the idea is that whatever the veterans' health funding is going to be, you decide it a year in advance, just so that you can plan better, so you can have a more rational system. Are there other parts of the government that are funded this way?
Yes. For example, PBS. So if it's good enough for Big Bird, it should be good enough for our sergeants in the Marine Corps. It's very difficult for these VA hospitals. I was there today with a guy named Sergeant Ray Nial. He was a Lance Corporal in the Marine Corps, a Bronze Star with V device recipient. He has to drive 5 hours to his VA hospital to receive care. When he gets there, the psychologist is only available 2 days out of the week. And it's not because of a lack of folks needing care. It's because his hospitals had to ration care because they don't know what they're their budget will be for the next year. It's like trying to plan your family's budget if you don't know what your next paycheck's going to be. So this is really a historic piece of legislation. Every major veterans group in the country is behind it, and we need the rest of the American people to ensure that every member of the House and Senate is on board and supporting our veterans in this very critical way.
This is why people support vets groups like IAVA, because you're taking a problem that has headline consequences and figuring out the super boring bureaucratic thing that would actually fix it, and then taking time to educate your members enough so that you guys go fix the boring bureaucratic thing. It's not just headlines, it's about making government work right. Congratulations to you guys on that.
It is, and it's also about taking care of our own. You mentioned the suicide numbers last month. In January, we lost approximately 24 soldiers in the Army to suicide. That's more folks than we lost in combat. So in January 2009, we lost more soldiers to suicide than to Al-Qaeda. I mean, that is a really, really troubling number. We've got to get ahead of the curve. The Army needs mandatory mental health counseling by qualified mental health care professionals. There's a shortage of them at the DOD and at the VA, and we need the American public to really rally behind this. If we lost that many soldiers to an enemy weapons system, the entire country would be outraged. The Pentagon would be scrambling to do something about it. We need the same level of urgency around these suicides.
Well, Paul, reading Mark Benjamin's reporting in Salon.com this week, and it is incredible reporting, he consistently reiterates that the Army feels like they've got stuff to brag about in terms of how much they've improved on mental health issue. They've got a 24/7 hotline. They've hired more people. They think in terms of the way they handle this stuff that they've improved. But the outcomes just keep getting worse. Does that mean that the mental health situation among veterans, among recent veterans, is just so bad that no matter what the Army does, they can't keep up with it? Or what's going on here?
Well, they're definitely playing catch-up. I think the Army realized that they've got a very serious situation here. Tomorrow, they'll be doing a stand-down around the country for every Army recruiting station. They will take a day off, do some suicide prevention training, because suicides have been very high in the recruiting command. They need to get ahead of the curve here. General Corelli, on a recent press conference call, admitted that they need help. They need mental health care counselors. This is a place where President Obama can step up. Michelle Obama has also talked about focusing on military families. He could issue a national call to service and say, if you are a qualified mental health care professional, your country needs you. Help our soldiers, help our veterans. It doesn't matter how you stand in the war. You can step up and make a difference here.
Paul, last question for you. Last week on this show, we talked to Michael Hastings, who's a journalist who'd just been in Afghanistan. He was embedded with U.S. troops on the Pakistan-Afghanistan border, and he talked about spending a night on the border, watching the Afghan border guards who were with U.S. troops there, smoking hash all night, waiting for the Taliban to attack and cross back over the border into Pakistan. We got a lot of response from serving members of the military to that piece. Do you think that there is still a big gap between the reality on the front lines, what is known by the people who've got boots on the ground, and the perceptions of the people in the government and at the top levels of the Pentagon who are running the war?
I think that there's always a gap. There's always a gap between the policymakers and what we'd call in the military the ground truth, what the grunts are seeing on the ground. But I do think that's changing. I think we've got a much more sophisticated conversation going on in this town than we did a few years ago. People are finally starting to understand that troops alone are not the answer. It's not an antidote to violence. You don't just drop 30,000 troops in, wave a magic wand, and call it democracy and make it look like New Jersey. It's going to take comprehensive efforts that include microfinance. The State Department's got to get involved. Secretary Gates deserves a lot of credit for, although he leads the Defense Department, calling for more State Department resources. There are also folks here on the Hill now who've been in Iraq and Afghanistan. Congressmen like Patrick Murphy, who sits on the Armed Services Committee, Congressman Sestak, and others. And Obama deserves some credit, too. He's put a lot of folks in the new DOD that have served on the ground in Iraq and Afghanistan. And I think that will help us understand these issues.
Paul Rieckhoff, thank you for helping us make sense of what sometimes feels like a very overwhelming topic. Paul, thanks a lot.
Thank you, Rachel.
Paul is founder and executive director of Iraq and Afghanistan Veterans of America. You should check out their website, IAVA.org.